Next, we're going to talk about a chilling warning from NATO that within the next 2 decades, Britain could be at war with Russia. Joining me now is Jerome Starkey, defence editor at The Sun. Jerome, I mean, what a chilling warning from NATO. Is this credible?
It's absolutely credible. I mean, it's worth pointing out that it's NATO's job to assess the threats to the alliance. And so this came out of a meeting of the chiefs of defence, the heads of the various armed forces of the 31 members of NATO. And it was Admiral Rob Bauer, a Dutch admiral who chairs that committee, who issued this warning. There is concern among military men and women, especially at the sort of top echelons of various armed forces, that not only are the armed forces themselves not strong enough, not well enough resourced, but also that societies more widely, so that's you and me, are not necessarily prepared for what might come with a conflict. And that's a sort of resilience. So one of Admiral Bauer's messages was that perhaps we need to be prepared for conscription, and the mechanisms that might be involved in conscription or a sort of draft of volunteers to fight a conflict need to be dusted off and refreshed. And he praised Sweden, which has warned its own civilians, its population, exactly this, that as it joins NATO, its population needs to be prepared that, you know, joining that alliance might entail a conflict. Of course, worth pointing out, I mean, his time frame was 20 years, but our own Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, just a few days ago, in his sort of maiden speech, major speech on defence, suggested that in 5 years' time, the United Kingdom might be looking at theatres, was his word, but effectively conflicts in Iran, North Korea, Russia, you know, and China. So his warning was perhaps even more stark.
And do you know what I find really worrying about this, and I think our viewers will be worried about at home? We asked a question last week on this show about whether, in fact, Britain was on the verge of a Third World War. But if you look back in history, it's when people start to talk about these type of conflicts that they become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that may be because we talk about them when they are threatened. How worried should people be at home? Is this NATO sort of speaking out, give us more cash, you all need to invest more, particularly France and Germany, I think, were singled out. Is this a sort of call for cash, or is this a call for readiness?
It's a really good question. And to your first point, should people be worried? I mean, my point of view is no, because, you know, worrying in itself won't make anything better. Worrying in itself won't do them any benefits and won't change the outcomes. Is this a call for cash? Well, inevitably, yes. Part of it is that. But, you know, is it warmongering for the sake of warmongering? No, I don't think so. We can see the world we're living in. There is the largest conflict in Europe since World War II is unfolding before our eyes in Ukraine. Russia has invaded a sovereign nation. The Baltic states are feeling understandably very threatened. The amount of territory that Russia has taken in Ukraine over the last 2 years, if they were to take that amount of territory in the Baltics, they would have annihilated those states. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, those countries would effectively be conquered. So in one sense, the only reason, or one of the reasons, that Ukraine is still a sovereign country defending itself from this Russian invasion is because it's so big. Its size was one of its greatest assets in defending this attack. You know, we can also see what's happening in the Red Sea. Iran and Pakistan are trading missiles. Jordan has launched missiles against one of its neighbours recently. You know, there's a lot of conflict bubbling, and there are genuine, legitimate concerns that any one of these incidents could be the flashpoint that ignites a wider conflict. And so the message from NATO, I think, is we need to take these threats seriously, and we need to try and be prepared. Their message, whether or not you think it's warmongering or not, is that in order to avoid war, you have to prepare for war.
Okay, well, interestingly on that Iran-Pakistan conflict, I mean, you track this really carefully. Of course, it's your job at The Sun to have an eye on this for us. But that felt to me like it came out of nowhere, because Iran and Pakistan have historically been allies on many of these issues.
Well, Iran is a tricky neighbour, I think, for all of its neighbours. And you're right, in one sense, it did come as a surprise because, you know, it was, as Pakistan said, an unprovoked attack. But Pakistan described it as a breach of its airspace rather than a breach of its sovereignty or a declaration of war. Just to remind viewers what happened, Iran launched a series of missiles and drones into southwestern Pakistan, into the Baluchistan region. Iran said it was attacking Iranian separatists who were using Pakistani territory as a safe haven. Iran was probably trying to show its own people that when it is attacked, because of course Iran has had a really serious set of suicide attacks inside Iran recently, Iran was probably trying to show its own people that it maintains the capability to strike outside its borders at a time and a place of its choosing. A message to its own people, but also, of course, a message to the rest of us as well.
And the wider world. And on that conflict in the Red Sea, of course, saw British engagement there last week. I mean, let's make no bones about it. The attack on the British ship was the largest attack on any Royal Navy ship since the Falklands War. We all think of the tragic loss of HMS Sheffield during the Falklands War and the loss of British sailors there. That conflict is hotting up still, and we hear about ships going through those sea lanes, broadcasting messages saying, no Israeli connection, armed guards on board. Is that going to work for them?
Well, for that to work, it would require some level of discretion from the Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen who've been launching these attacks. Now, the Houthis say that they've been targeting ships and shipping that is supporting Israel, that's carrying, either owned by Israeli companies or perhaps carrying material towards Israel to support its assault on Hamas in Gaza. The message from the US and the United Kingdom is actually these attacks are totally indiscriminate. That's attacking all merchant shipping. And the effect of these attacks is that all sorts of shipping is diverting around the Horn of Africa. So unlikely to make a huge difference. And of course, an armed guard on a merchant ship can't do much against a ballistic or cruise missile.
No. And of course, putting 3p estimated on a litre of fuel on the forecourts here in the UK. We've talked about how dangerous the world is. Britain has an ambition to increase its military spending as part of GDP. In fact, Russia is spending an extraordinary 40% of its GDP on arming itself at the moment. Is Britain pulling its weight in NATO? If so, good, or is there more we need to do? But also, who are the people who are falling behind, who we need to pressurise?
Well, this is a really live debate. And of course, it's really interesting because we are at a time where the government has said it wants to increase spending to 2.5% of GDP. At the moment, the UK spending, I think it's about 2.1, it's about 53 billion pounds a year. The UK is a leader within NATO, but it's not, obviously it's behind America. Poland has massively ramped up its defence spending in result of the war in Ukraine. So actually they're ahead of us. And one of the things, of course, to remember about our own spending in the UK is that, large as it is relative to some of the other NATO members, a lot of that money goes on our nuclear deterrent. A huge amount of that money goes on our nuclear deterrent. The 4 nuclear submarines, the dreadnoughts that are due to replace them. Some £31 billion is earmarked to refresh the nuclear deterrent that the UK maintains. And of course, that means we have less for our conventional forces, our army.
But the nuclear deterrent is the main thing that we bring to the table, if you like, in NATO as a nuclear power together with France.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a core part of our contribution to NATO. Of course, America provides nuclear weapons. France has a nuclear deterrent as well. But you're absolutely right. And in many ways, it keeps Britain's seat at top table. The United Kingdom is a nuclear power. But what recent years have shown us is that there are conflicts below the level of nuclear war. And if the UK and its allies is to be able to engage in those conflicts without resorting to Armageddon and World War III, then perhaps it needs to have, well, certainly they need to have robust armed forces, conventional armed forces.
And let's not forget, if the Third World War is fought with nuclear weapons, the Fourth World War will be fought with spears and sticks.